Okay, everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. He'll be giving us an information session on running for council and local government structure and its structural parameters. Yes. She has over 30 years of experience in local government as a professional and served as both councillor and mayor of the district of Central Sandwich. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
As a planner, consultant and trainer for the local governments all over BC. So Armstrong Municipal, she is Allison Habkirk.
Nice lively group, that's great. And what I want to say is this will be way more interesting if it's a dialogue and not me just blah at you. So I just encourage you to ask questions and don't throw anything. Although I'm not sure that these guys over here take up the but yeah, if we could have a conversation, and we have an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I've tried to anticipate what you might want to know about, but we'll go wherever you want to go and address the topics that you want to address. So with that, let me ask you this. I've anticipated a whole bunch of questions you might want. What does it take to be a successful counselor? What's the responsible conduct? What's an in-camera meeting? So some pretty broad stuff and some really specific stuff. But let me ask you this. It's going to be very sensitive. Lots of stuff up there, so it's a fair distance. So, are there any questions, any topics you would specifically like to talk about tonight? Anything that you think would be make for a good conversation? Anything on your mind? Any specific questions? Don't be shy. Yeah.
Hey, Allison. Over your past experience, what would you say are some of the biggest changes from running for council, say 20 years ago to today?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, I'll hang on to that one. Okay. Anything else you'd like to talk about? So maybe we'll start with that. So okay, just as we go along the way tonight, just pipe up and if there aren't any stupid questions. So, but that's a really great question. Yeah, I was lucky to be an elected official at a time when social media was just starting. And it's a whole different game now. And I don't know, did anybody hear the interview I did with CBC this morning by Ron Johnson? Because this was one of the things I brought up. And for those of you who are currently elected officials, this can be really the social media can be really hard. And I think being elected official has always been hard on people personally. You're exposed, you're out there, people have expectations of you. I had young children when I was in office, and they were vulnerable too. Their classmates knew that I was the mayor, and that was sometimes really a lot of fun. My daughter really liked it. She got to be in parade. She loved it. My son hated it. And there were a couple of times when the kids at school were hard on me. So all of that is out there. So I think it's always been hard to be an elected official. And I think you need to steel yourself for that and be prepared for that. But the social media it's taken it to a whole other level. And in fact, this week I was dealing with a client on Vancouver Island, a community on Vancouver Island, and they have a little Facebook war going on. And the corporate officer sent me a series of Facebook posts, and I read through them, and I was just absolutely horrified. I was horrified at what the public were saying, and I was horrified at what the elected officials were saying. Man, just don't go there. Like, just don't get into it. It's just so bad. And so I think that is no question in my mind the biggest change in 20 years. I think the one other thing is that the job has gotten more complex, and the expectations of local governments are much higher than they were when I first started in local government. You know, local governments in Canada were really formed to provide services and property, and I think 50 years ago we were talking about consumers and that kind of stuff. Now you're into homelessness, affordable housing, all kinds of social support programs that local governments were, in British Columbia anyways, never intended to provide. Services we were never intended to provide. And you have to remember that the bulk of your revenues come from property taxes. So you're funding social programs with property taxes with progressive taxes, right? So there's a lot of unhappiness about that. That's, you know, the expansion of services in local governments in BC is really pretty profound. Would you agree generally? Sorry, do you have something?
Well, no, I think I agree with you with social media, because now anybody says anything, you're instantly judged on social media, you're crucified, or you know, even running down the right context, and people will be quick to judge. And I think that's very, very hard on elected officials when you're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And even if there's a perception of something that, you know, not all the facts out there, or something inaccurate.
Yeah.
But it spreads so fast. Another thing that I find too is it's getting harder and harder to deal with provincial and federal government, because there's so many layers of bureaucracy that it's frustrating at this level. Try to go. I remember 10 years ago, I was told when you're in this, nothing will go fast. And then if you've got to deal with the province, it'll go really slow. And if you have to deal with the feds, it's glacial. And I kind of laughed at that. But it's not going to be like private business. That was so accurate. And I find it's more so now than 10 years ago.
That's interesting. I think that, you know, if the province wants to do something, they can act quite quickly. You know, but they might not always want to do it.
Yeah, maybe that's more accurate.
Okay. All right. So we'll just go wherever you guys want to go. So, you know, I'd like to suggest people when they're thinking about running for office that they really take some time to reflect on why you want to go for office. What is it that's motivating you to think about running for office? And here's some of the things that I think, you know, I think most elected officials in BC that I come in contact with are genuinely motivated to do something for their community. That's really what brings them to the table. I mean, there are some bad apples out there, but especially in small town BC, you know, 75% of all the municipalities in BC have a population of less than 15,000. So even the bulk of elected officials in BC are from small towns. And I think most of them genuinely want to do something to their community. They feel some sense of responsibility. They've had a good life. They've done okay in their community, and they want to have. So I think that's probably the number one motivation. You might think that being an elected official is an honorable role. I mean, even just saying that almost makes you laugh these days, right? Because you can hardly believe it. But you know what? I really believe that. I really believe that being an elected official is honorable. And it's so essential to our system of government. If we want to live in a democratic society, we need good people to be elected officials. So I actually think I'm not as cynical as the media is or lots of the public are. I really believe that it's an honorable job, and most people are doing it for good reasons and are well-intentioned. So you might be thinking that. You might want to be a role model for your children or for the next generation. You know, this was actually, this sounds a little sweet and sentimental, but I really wanted to demonstrate to my children that they needed to participate in their democratic movement. That was actually really important to me. Now, just going back to my daughter, I think she will do something along these lines one day. Maybe not as an elected official, but she'll be a leader in whatever she does. My son, community center. But you know, I really wanted them to see that you can't just sit on the sidelines for days. You have to participate. And for sure, my children are always good. They would be in trouble. Yeah, so a healthy Democrat government needs committed, honest, and informed elected officials. You might want to lead change in your community. You might think, okay, it's time for some change in our community, so you want to be a part of that. I think those are all really good reasons. And I think probably most people who run for office at local government level, they're thinking along these lines. There are also some really bad reasons to run. And I would really ask you to think twice if some of these things in your background line. You're really pissed at the incumbents and you want to get them to vote, right? So you're mad, you're motivated, more angry. You have one project that you want to see done. You know, 4 years is a long time. If you only want to see the sheet of ice built or a sidewalk built or a road built or a sewer plant built, it's going to be a really long 4 years. So if you're a single issue candidate, you know, really could be quite painful. And you have a much broader responsibility to your decisions. If you need the money, yeah, this is not, you know, there are much better ways to make money, right? I know, you know, you hear in the media often accusing you of, you know, just living. In fact, driving up here, as I was driving through the Fraser Valley, there was this piece on the radio. Somebody was talking about the gravy train for elected officials. Well, for sure at the local government level, this is no gravy train, right? You know? And so if you need the money and you're thinking you're going to get it as a local government elected official, then not a good idea. If you think you can run government like a business, think twice about that too. There's lots of things local government can learn about, you know, operations from the private sector. But if you want to run government like a business, you're going to close your fire department down because you know what? They don't make money, right? You have to subsidize them. You're going to close your recreation centers down, right? I mean, government is different than business. You can't run government like a business. And you have citizens to serve. And you have competing values to deal with. You just don't have those freedoms in government like you do in the private sector. You think the counselor's job is an easy job? Yeah, don't think twice. Really hard job, lots of reading. Going to spend a lot of time talking to people. Going to spend a lot of time talking to people who are pissed at you. So, you know, not an easy job. You think it'll help your business? Probably not, especially these days in the age of social media. It probably won't help you practice your business. Can you imagine me? I'm a town planner by training. He was a mayor. You know, none of the local communities would hire me as a consultant planner when I was mayor. That was his total planning business. Or you want to help other people. You want to help people who are support. That's probably bad. So those are some reasons you might want to think twice if that's what one of these things is motivating. So what do municipalities do anyways? So I'm just going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about regional districts right now. Anybody here thinking about running for electoral area director? I kind of came prepared to talk about that. Municipalities do two things in our system of government. They provide services. So water, sewer, parks, sidewalks, those types of services. And then there are mechanisms, a governance mechanism, to enable people to voice their opinions, to elect you, to give you input into your decisions. So your job is to take what you hear from your public and translate that into action, policies, laws. So it's a governance. Two. Regional districts are a little more complicated. You know, regional districts, people like to talk about them as an order of government, but they're really not. they're federations where municipalities come together and electoral areas come together to do a number of things. So you must be in the, I should have checked this more, but the regional district, right? And really they were set up to do a couple of very special things. One was to provide a mechanism for these governments to come together to actually partner on projects. So it was you that was just telling me that there was a sewer plant being built, probably a number of different municipalities and electoral areas coming together, and a First Nation, which makes it especially complicated. But they were actually, before regional districts existed, that was really, really hard to do. And regional districts were designed to allow multiple jurisdictions to come together and partner to provide services. They provide general government for the electoral area directors, right? Their electoral areas, which don't have councils, they have a director that's elected to a board. So the general government service is run through their leadership. And then they also have this role, an administrative role, including borrowing. So borrowing goes through the districts. So they are a place where a whole bunch of jurisdictions come together to do things together and to provide services across multiple jurisdictions. So where does local government get its authority from? So you think, oh, we're not able to get this support, so how do we get it, right? In Canada, it really comes from the Constitution Act. Our Constitution Act divides up responsibilities between the federal government and the provinces. And in the Act, Section 92, the provinces get the responsibility for local government, which is why across Canada you have different legislation for local government. So in BC, all of the authority for local governments rests with the province, and that the province essentially delegates authority to local governments. And that's why you hear people say local governments are creatures of the province, right? You're not, despite what the community charter says, you're not actually an order of government. You have all this power through the province. And interestingly, I think right now, this goes back to your question about what's changing, I think the province is going to take back something power. So you hear Minister Heaney talking about changing the process for land use approvals. I think they're going to pull back some of that authority. And they have total authority. It's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, in my time in local government, I've seen an expansion of local responsibilities, and I think you might see a contraction of certain things. And there are two principal pieces of legislation that, if you're running for office, you should be aware of. There's, I could list 100 here, but there are two big pieces. One is the community charter, which lays out authority for local governments, or for municipalities, I'm sorry. And that's kind of the principal municipal legislation in the province. And the other one is the Local Government Act that retains all the legislation around land use planning, regional districts, and elections. And the reason we have two pieces of legislation is because during Gordon Campbell's time as Premier, they were reforming the legislation, and they only got that far. They only got the community charter piece, and when they got to elections, regional districts, and land use planning, they stopped, and I think they just didn't have the energy to keep going. Here we are. So now, you go to Alberta, they have one piece of legislation, we have two. We're special. When you get elected, you swear an oath. And I'm here to encourage you to take it seriously. Do it in front of a judge usually, or justice of the peace, something like that. And you make certain commitments, swearing that you're going to do these things. And I found it a solemn experience. I mean, it's moving, and I encourage you to really take it seriously. And I'll say that currently the oath of office is being revised, and so probably within the next couple of months we'll see a revision of the oath. And what it's going to do is maybe most importantly, it's going to take the word pecuniary out of it, so that when you're up there and you're nervous, you're not going to trip over that word, which is really awesome. But, and I'm going to come back to this, but there's a set of principles that we're calling foundational principles of responsible conduct, are actually going to be incorporated into the code. So you will, fingers crossed, I think this is going to happen. You will be sworn oath that you will uphold the foundational principles of responsible government. That will be part of your commitment to your government, to your institutions. So stay tuned on that. So what does the charter say is the role of local government in BC? Here's what it says. 4 things. You're to provide good government for your community, and we'll come back to what you're to provide for services, laws, and other matters for community benefit. You're to provide stewardship of community assets. So you hear a lot of talk about asset management now. This is about really caring for the assets that the taxpayers have paid for over the communities. And to foster environmental, social, economic, social, and environmental well-being in the community. So that's what we're supposed to be doing. So what's responsible conduct? So I assume you've all seen in the media recently reports of bad behavior of local elected officials. So it's become a real concern across BC, I think exacerbated by social media. And I would say that the media itself has been kind of feasting on this, but there have been a number of really high-profile legal cases in the last maybe 10 years, and I think we're going to see more. So what the province, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the Union of BC Municipalities, and the Local Government Management Association have come together to form what's called a working group on responsible conduct, and they're working to find ways to help local governments address poor behavior by councils, by individual council members. So as a first step, this came out about 5 or 6 years ago, were these foundational principles of responsible government. And you know, they're not earth-shattering, I don't think. I think you would think that this is what you would hope your elected officials would do. That they'll act with integrity, that they'll be accountable to the citizens, that they'll treat each other and the public and the staff with respect, and that they will be leaders and that they will collaborate. So those are the foundational principles of responsible government that are going to be incorporated into the whole office. And that will be part of your swearing in. I think I've seen this before, actually. This seems so basic, but you know, heretofore, never articulated on paper. I think maybe never had to. But now, we somehow have to remind ourselves of these.
Should be a large corporation, not exactly the same thing.
Sorry?
Every large corporation.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I get it. And if it's convoluted to people, then you're in the wrong ship. You're in the wrong boat.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say, you know, your staff, as members of, like your CAOs, as members of local government management, they have code of ethics. It's enforceable. And, you know, it's based on similar principles. So I'm a registered professional planner. I have a code of ethics, and I'll tell you, if you breach the code, you lose your license. You know, you're booted out. So we're obviously not going to go that far with elected officials. The province has indicated that disqualification from office is off the table, but I think we're going to see more sanctions and more enforcement codes of conduct.
So what is that? If you to abide by all the rules, which hopefully people have running for office, why is it so difficult to weed out that happening? gives everybody kind of this bad feeling about following the rules that there's no consequence. It's a really big thing for the country, to local elected officials in BC, and they're still there.
Yeah.
I don't understand why.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good question. I think there's a couple of things. Just on the practical side of things, we as a system have not had to deal with this. And it may be that there was a lot of things that were hidden or were done in the background and just weren't visible. But we don't have very good mechanisms to enforce the behavior. So that's what the working group on responsible conduct has been working on for 6 years, trying to figure out what mechanisms can we use. And published a document about a year and a half called Forging a Path to Responsible Government, and there's a whole section in there on enforcement. So there are things that local governments can do, and they've been tested in court, so we know that they're usable now. So council has the right to enforce a code of conduct, and the kind of enforcement mechanisms can include things like removing somebody from their appointments to committees, removing them in their turn as alternate mayor or deputy mayor. You can remove their pay. You cannot provide funding for travel, not going to fund them to go to UBCM. But disqualification of office is not on the table. And I think why that is, or I know why that is you know, there is this very strong feeling that if the public has elected somebody, that it has to be something really, really egregious that causes them to be removed from office. And there are a few things, but not to be done with. So if you are convicted of conflict of interest, that's a disqualification breach. So there are a few things that can cause somebody to be removed from office, but conduct so far is not seen as being. And I think it's really this commitment to the electorate, duly elected, right? The thing that I don't understand is when somebody does something really bad and then they're re-elected. I don't get that. Then you just think, oh my God, what are the people thinking, right? But this is democracy, right? I mean, people have the right to vote in somebody that's not ideal.
So the highest profile we've had in the last couple of years in America with his policing stuff and all his fundamental stuff. And, nothing's happened to him. I mean, he's taken a lot of hits, but he's still swinging.
Yeah, he has followers. He holds the majority of the council.
Yeah.
Like, they're with him. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in election time there. And if he's re-elected, this is not a partisan comment, but given the fractious nature of the community, if he's re-elected, then that's what the people want. They want somebody like that.
It's sort of politically everywhere right now is no different than what's occurring in Syria. We have two camps everywhere, and so some of them are white, some of them it's black, and we have to learn to change and adapt. But I don't think things are the way they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Much different world.
Yeah, I think you hear a lot of talk these days about our country becoming polarized, and look at Pierre Polyev, right? Polarizing territory, right? And I would have hoped that we had more support for common values, but I think
Very diverse now.
it's a much rougher time now. Which is why I would argue that we need to work harder. We need to work harder. You can't just sit back and expect democracy to be okay and things are going to go along fine. No, we really need to participate. We need to commit energy, and we need to protect.
We need to listen more.
Yeah, we need to listen more.
We have to hear the other opinion.
Yes.
And reflect on it. It may not be correct for the situation, but it may have some validity.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that's one of my words of advice to people running for council is that, you know, one of the skills you really need to bring this job is an ability to listen and not just, you know, blah, 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 and hear, but actually really hear what people are saying. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to really be able to consider it and not just dismiss them and marginalize them. And, you know, I will fully admit that when I was first elected, and I was elected in a sweep, the whole council was shuffled in the door. And we had 7 new members of the council. And, you know, it was a bit shocking to the system for staff. But I just don't think I realized at the time how important it is to hear those diverse opinions.
So what was the issue that all kicked off?
It was, you know, our community was at a turning point in history, and it was all about development. And so we heard some of these fellows that my community, 3/4 of the community, almost 3/4 of the community is in the agricultural land reserve, and ripe for predatory development. And the previous council had made, I think, some, you know, some decisions that just weren't supported by the community, and it just got turned. Yeah. And it really was it's interesting because I look back at that, it was a real turning point in the history of the community. And I'm happy to say, although there have been knocks along the road, the community has been on a different path, really protecting agriculture.
When that occurred, was there a group that got together and decided that they wanted to take over this?
Yeah, you know, interestingly, no.
I've seen that in other municipalities where they just, everybody's gone and a group of people have campaigned together as a slate candidate.
Yeah.
And then they go that way and the people don't like it 4 years later into another term.
Yeah. No, it was really interesting. And, you know, my community, again, has these deep farming roots, which you can probably, you know, relate to. And it's not like slates at all. It's really kind of a fierce independence, right? And so the 7 of us who were elected were all elected as independents. We didn't know each other. We didn't know each other at all. And we more or less, I mean, there were some changes in each election, but we more or less stayed together for 9 years. And then the other forces moved in, and I got sure. 9 years was enough. Anyways, yeah, so good behavior. Behave well. So there you go. What does it take to be a good member of council? Listening skills. Just as we were talking about. The ability to process a lot of information. This is a real challenge. It's how much information comes on an agenda. And if you're on the regional district, not only do you have your own community's information to deal with, but you have the regional district's information. So you could easily have an agenda of 100 pages or 200 pages. And you need to be able to sift through that, figure out what you really need to pay attention to and what you can kind of gloss over. And you need to be able to synthesize that information and then, you know, apply some critical thinking skills and come up with a perspective that then you can take to the council meeting or discuss things. You want to be committed to upholding the law. And whenever I say that, I can hardly believe that I have to say this, but I've had council members who say, yeah, not so much. You know, and I'm happy to say in the new oath of office, you're going to have to commit to upholding the law. And I'm going to call this the Allison Habkirk Amendment because I've really advocated for this. I think that people, when they're taking their oath, should be reminded that, yeah, you're supposed to uphold the law. So you ought to be encouraged to do that. Ought to commit to the foundational principles of responsible conduct. You should have a clarity of purpose. You should really understand why you're doing this job. What is it? What is the calling that brings you to be an elected official? Because I think that helps take you through the rough times, especially if you're being beaten up. I'm here because I really want to give something to my community. I'm doing the best job I can. And, you know, the people that are bragging on me just are going to have to. I'm putting the order. You ought to have some high ethical principles and integrity, accountability, all that kind of stuff. And you need to work hard, because I think it's a hard job. You gotta talk to a lot of people, gotta read a lot, gotta do a lot, gotta deal with a lot of conflict, gotta find compromise, gotta bring people together, gotta lead people. It's a hard job. And you're getting rich on it, yeah.
Maybe it's all sheep.
Not an Armstrong, just in spelling machine, those guys, right?
Can I share a personal reflection?
Yeah, please.
Because I think it's relevant. So my daughter, who Mayor Chris knows, she came to her first, when you guys do your thing where you say why you want to be elected, and it was at the church ABC. Was that 4 years ago maybe, at ABC? And two of these, commitment to the law and ethics is the reason I'm bringing it up. So one of the candidates who didn't make it in, there was a comment or thing about one of the bylaws, and his comment was, well, if no one really knows you're doing it, is it really wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
And on the drive home, my daughter at 12 years old said, and actually at that time, yeah, she would have been 12, she's 16 now. She said, Mom, isn't that like against the law? And isn't that what you told me about ethics? And at 12 years old, she picked up on that, and it's scary to me that people didn't even register. My mom was there. My mom's like, oh, I didn't even pick up on that. Because we're so numb to it.
Yeah.
So, and that's why she got interested. She started coming to council meetings because Mayor Chris and Mayor really special.
Yes. Well, you just think about, the impression that makes, and I trust you told her that was real.
Oh, absolutely. And she said, Mom, you're not allowed to vote for him. I didn't vote for him.
Exactly.
You know, that happens at such a young age, but the fact that my mom didn't even pick up on it was what actually surprised me even more. Is that we get so numb to just not even listening.
Yeah. And good for you for bringing your daughter along. Like, I think in Canada generally we do a really poor job of educating. I think we use the word educating, but exposing young people to the importance of good governance and good behavior and ethical behavior. And helping them to understand, well, what does government do anyways, right? I mean, we need to do a much, much better job of that. And my daughter spent a lot of time in the council chambers, so she's fully indoctrinated. When she was quite young, she said, this was horrifying. I probably shouldn't tell this story. But she said to me, I said, Rose, her name's Rose. I said, Rose, why do you like coming to sit in the council meetings? Because I had these afternoon meetings and I didn't have daycare, so she had to come and sit in the council chamber, and the fire chief was always really good to her, and she was well amused, right? And I said, why do you like coming to sit in the council chamber? She said, well, because I really like to see you fight with people. Oh, jeez. Oh, anyways, she has been going. She now tells me, we did a big revitalization project in Burnaby Bay while I was mayor, and I was really committed to this because we had, kind of typical kind of strip of highway, 4 lanes through this little tiny village. And it's one of the things we did was put in bike lanes and all kinds of big pedestrian things. But we also planted this beautiful, beautiful row of magnolia trees down the center of the street. And it really, at this time of year, it's magnificent. So recently my daughter, who's now 28 years old, came home and she said, oh, Mom, I just love looking at those magnolias. It just reminds me that you really did great things as mayor. Those magnolias, they're not, I didn't do that. But I'm going to take them. So that is the upside of being an elected officials. You really do, if you're lucky enough, you get to do some really great things in your community. You get to sort of realize these aspirations of the community. I look at those magnolias and I think, well, that really made a difference. It made a much more beautiful place for the businesses and for the people who live in it. So I'm just going to come back to this. So what is governance? Like, what's your job as a governing body if you're on council? And this is kind of a sort of well-accepted way to look at this. There are 4 pillars to explain what good governance is. So what do? So you set the strategic direction, the long-term direction of your community. You know, you want to be looking out. Your official community plan should look out 10 or 20 years. You're going to have a strategic plan that's at least 5 years. You want to set the course for your community. It's not enough to just go day-to-day planning communities these days, especially planning the finances and the infrastructure that goes along with growth and development. So you really need to have a longer vision. So setting the strategic direction, I would say across BC, we don't necessarily do a great job of it these days, particularly strategic planning. We kind of do a half-assed job. We're getting better at it. But yeah, the official community plan and the strategic plan council. And you allocate resources. So this is what budgeting is all about. Every year you go through this budgeting process and allocate the money to your different projects and different work and making sure you've got the staffing necessary to do it. And setting the longer term financial plans, so, 5-year capital plan, 5-year financial plan. Really, again, trying to look forward and make sure you have the resources to do the things that you have an oversight and reporting role, so you have oversight of your chief administrative officer. You're responsible for hiring the chief administrative officer and for supervising or overseeing their work and making sure that we're getting feedback on their performance. And reporting up to the public, you need to provide an annual report every year of what you spend the money on, what you've accomplished, that kind of stuff. And then you have a role managing risks. So managing risks, say, associated with your infrastructure, making sure that your assets are safe, well maintained, and then managing the legal risks that there's legal threats to your organization all the time. So those are the 4 big responsibilities of the governing body of the municipality. That's what, in my view, that's what good governance is really looking at these things very well. And, people talk about stewardship. So, your role as the governing body is to steward your municipality. And I'd like to say that, before you, there are elected officials, and after you, there are going to be elected officials. And for that period of time you're in office, you're stewarding the community. You're looking after the public who really own the community, having trusted you to look after on their behalf, right? So you're stewards. So let's take a look at what you're actually stewarding. In the City of Armstrong, here's your organization. This is from the 2020 annual report. And if you haven't looked at the annual report of the communities, this is a great source of information. If I go out to do a job in a community, I look at this and I look at the official community plan because it really gives you very quickly a picture of what's going on in the organization. So this might be a little out of date. I put Don Lowe's name in there, but it might be a little out of date, but that's the latest report we've got. So you can see that the citizens are at the top. They're the people really making the decisions, electing you, and the council. And then the council is connected to the chief administrative officer, right? When you hear people talk about the one employee model, now you have one employee as the council, and your chief administrative officer is responsible for all the other employees. So you communicate your direction through the CAO. And then I think I was establishing it. No, I'm going to go through Armstrong first. Sorry. This is just not going to cooperate. So here's attached to the annual report are the financial statements. So, and I'm going to confess, I'm not an accountant, so God help me if I've got this wrong. But we have the mayor of Armstrong here, so you can probably tell me if I'm wrong about this. So if I read this, you have about $48 million of tangible capital assets, right? So $48 million of assets. So over the years, City of Armstrong has taxed and probably got some grants along the way. And you have some fairly significant responsibilities to protect those assets, to maintain them, and to make sure they're there to serve the public. So 48 million bucks, it's a pretty hefty sum. And then it looks like your budget last year was somewhere around $7.5 million. Is that ring about true?
That's pretty cool, yeah.
Okay. So the reason why I bring these numbers to your attention is because, this is a weighty responsibility in my mind. You're not doing this on the back of an envelope. You're not doing it alone. You've got professional staff. But you've got real responsibility that you are going to carry out on behalf of the citizens, of the people. And you really want to think about that and take those budget decisions seriously and take the job of making sure the assets are managed seriously so that you can do good service to your citizens. And I think I have spelling machine here too. Yeah, here we go. So here's spelling machine's org chart. Mayor and council, chief administrative officer, and then all the staff underneath that. Both of these are fair-sized organizations. And then in terms of budgets, the capital assets, tangible capital assets are about $38 million. So those of you from spell machine, just call me out if you think that's not right. But about $38 million. Again, this is a chunk of assets to be responsible for. And the budget was expenses were about $6 million last year. Your job is to look after those things and to make the decisions related to them. And so again, if you haven't read your annual report and you're thinking about running for office, I recommend this. It's a really great way to have a peek into the organization. And they're generally really well done, I would say, across the province. Any questions about that just before I move on? Any questions about, if you imagine that you were a company, a private company, you had $40 million worth of assets and $8 million budget, you gotta look after that, right? That's your job. So, shared and collective decision making, I'm here to tell you that as individuals, you have absolutely no authority. You only have authority as a collective group. And that is a super hard thing to come to terms with, especially after you've gone through an election campaign where you're standing up there saying, I'm the best person, that person over there, they're terrible. I'm the best person for the job. I'm going to do the right thing. And then you get elected, and all of a sudden you got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people that you have to work with. And councils only give direction. They only make decisions as a collective body. So as individuals, no authority. Mayors have little tiny bits of individual authority, right? Little tiny bits. But other than that, you're all individuals and you don't have any authority when you're not at the table. You can't commit to anything. You can't commit council to anything. You have to work as a collective. All of your decision has to be shared in a collective decision. And that transition from being a candidate to being part of a group of people that have to make a group decision, it can be really hard transition. So I'm here just to warn you that that's coming at you. And you ought to really think twice about making big promises in a campaign, because you can make all the promises you want, but you've got to have the rest of council with you. You have to have the majority of council with you so that you can actually fulfill those promises. Otherwise, you can just promise away, and you're never going to be able to fulfill your promises. It'd be hard on you, and the public is likely to be quite ticked at you because, but you promised you do this. I mean, well, I've got 6 other people I have to convince, right? And they don't agree. So, yeah. No, I just love the sound of that train. It's so great. I live in a place where there are no trains. So what kind of relationships do you want to form with your staff and the public? You know, I like to think of this as a 3-part partnership. In order for your local governments to work really well, there have got to be 3 parties at the table. It has to be council, and their job is to set the direction and make decisions. And you've got to have really good staff, really good professional staff, and their job is to give you really good professional advice and to implement your direction. So you make a decision, they're going to go and do it, right? That's their job. And then the public, they need to be informed. They need to know what's going on, and they really need to participate. They need to come out and vote. I think the average voter turnout in BC local government elections is about 25%. It's really pretty sad. Really pretty sad. I'm hoping that, you know, one of the good things that might come out of the Ukraine conflict is that people will. Oh, it's over. Uh-oh. We have a bulb failure?
I don't know.
Did my computer die?
Your computer's working.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, one of the good things, it's terrible to think of this way, that might come out of the conflict in Ukraine is
so that wasn't blinking before.
about, you know,
Just warming up. I did
the
blink before.
democratic, maybe we'll care more and feel like we need to protect it, we need to participate, and maybe at least come
He's
up with
terminating from Mobile, anything to ship.
So this on this subject,
Never take a lunch break. Right? Never go for a pee.
there's an issue of
Intermission.
in town or concern. Everybody is a really expert on every subject. And they feel that you might be that you're right, but for the most part, you're different people that think you're doing it all wrong. So my problem is that when 22% or whatever voted in Oversight, how do we get these people out to vote and understand that it is a democratic situation? And if you haven't voted, it's really hard to listen to all these people that haven't taken 5 minutes out of their 4 years to go down and vote for somebody that they can work with, that trust, and understand. What in the world can we do to get people to come out and vote?
Yeah. Just let me ask you, so have we got a complete failure?
Not quite. It's back on, so let's give it 1 second. We're good.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
Good job, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Well done. I was gonna, thank God I was thinking.
The intermission's over. Back to your seats, please.
Well, I mean, I think we've really wrestled with this question. I mean, nationally, we've really wrestled with this question. The voter turnout in the national governments, the national elections have been better, have stabilized and at times been higher. I think the last election, not so much the case. I think we really have to work on it. I really do. I think we have to literally campaign to get people to vote. And you see some of this, you know, it's about the stickers I voted, you know, having really good pre-election public forums, getting media, using social media, really trying to energize the electorate. I think we actually really have to work at it. And have to somehow connect with people to help them to understand how important this is. That, you know, the fact they get up in the morning and they turn the tap on and they flush the toilet, and that's because of you guys, right? It's because of councils. You know, we completely take these things for granted, but they really take a lot of work and energy and investment and resources to have the things that we have. And so I think we really need to help people to understand that. If they don't have a good council, they might not be turning the tap on in the morning. So I think it takes work and energy, and I think we should be investing in it. And I think we should be investing in our young people so that they know that this is important.
Of that 25% turnout, what's the demographic breakdown of that? Is it mostly people that are in their 40s, 50s? Is it younger demographic that's voting?
I don't think we have any data at the local government level. I've spent some time with the Civic Info BC that collects and publishes election data, and they do a fantastic job of that. And they have tried really hard to collect both gender data, ethnicity data, and age data, but of course it's just, you kind of can't do that these days. So in terms of elected officials, in terms of voters, again, I don't think there's any, I'm not aware of any good voter data. Maybe there, I don't know, that's a good question. Nationally, for sure, it's an older demographic that votes. For sure, there's good data. So I would expect that's probably the same. But you know, with the Gen Zers, you might see a different path. You might see them being more engaged. And I will say that in the last election, this is anecdotal, but my experience going to work with new councils is the demographic of the elected officials was definitely younger, definitely more women, and definitely more activist. See quite a change in them. So we'll see what happens in this election. But yeah, I think we really have to engage the younger population. Because, you know, people like me, I vote. I would never think of not voting. It would never occur to me. But, you know, if your daughter had been left to just absorb that, oh, our elected officials are crooks, kind of things, they don't care about the law, yeah.
I'll personally buy the I voted sticker. I think it's a fabulous idea.
Yeah.
I think that does drive. I was in the US when the election was going on, everybody was coming in with their stickers, and it was almost a bit over the top, like guilt.
Yeah.
To not have had one of those stickers.
Yeah. Our community does that. Do you guys do that? Do you have I vote stickers?
So.
I mean, it's a small thing. But and it needs to be more than just that, because of course everybody votes and gets a sticker. I mean, they've already done that, right? You've got to get at those people that don't vote. But
You need a sticker that says, I promise to vote.
yeah, I promise to vote. Exactly. Yeah. There you go. That's a great idea.
That's a really great idea.
Yeah. I promise to vote. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay. I'm remembering that for sure. So I just want to talk about this. You know, we really we benefit from having a non-partisan public service. The Code of Ethics of the Local Government Management Association commits staff to being non-partisan. I think we've seen this eroded somewhat in the last 10 years in British Columbia. There are risks to this. But our system is dependent on having a non-partisan public service. And I hope when people are elected, they come to see their staff as being non-partisan. And I've seen some really sad cases where a new council's been elected and they feel the staff are too closely aligned to the previous council and they are let go. And I think most staff in British Columbia are really committed to a non-partisan public service, and I hope it will stay that way. And, you know, I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, when I was elected, I had an absolutely fantastic CAO who was great and who I, you know, still see occasionally from time to time. And when I lost the race as mayor, there was quite a different council who was elected. And he served them just as well as he served me. And the people that were before me, the council before me, he served them just as well. And that is a sign of a really wonderful public servant. That it doesn't matter what the politics of the elected officials are. They are going to serve all the elected officials equally well. So this is very, very important in our our system, I think. So you hear a lot about, well, how do you build a relationship with the staff? How do you have a good relationship with the staff so that you can really work well together? Because you're codependent, right? I mean, council can't do a whole lot without the staff because you need somebody to implement your direction, and the staff can't do anything without getting good direction. So how do you make that work really well? I think really understanding the role of the staff and understanding the role of the elected officials. So, you need to understand your role and what's in your lane, and the staff need to understand their role and what's in their lane. And God forbid that they should, move into each other's lanes. It generally doesn't go well. Staff shouldn't be making decisions, and the council shouldn't be implementing things. They shouldn't be fixing the potholes, right? That's for the staff. Councils need to really communicate clear directions. So having a really good strategic plan, setting out expectations, communicating with the staff what it is that they really want done, making sure it's well understood, will really make the staff's job a lot easier. So motions need to be clear, direction needs to be clear. And you need to provide adequate resourcing. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, we want you to do this, but we're not giving you any resources to do it, right? It needs to be a good fit of expectations and resources. You should really be assessing your progress regularly. So if you have a strategic plan, there should be, quarterly or 3 times a year updates. Where are we at? What progress is being made? Are we on target? If we're not, why not? What can we do to make it different? So regular strategic plan updates, annual reporting, you're required by law to do that. You have to be, producing a good annual report and taking it seriously. And you should be evaluating your CAO every year. I did this terribly. I hated doing this job. But it's really important that you set expectations for your CAO and you actually do the evaluation. If you don't have the skills here, this is what I should have done. I didn't have the skills to do it. And our council we just avoided it. We hated doing it. You should hire somebody to help you do it, right? Help you to give good feedback. Because there's nothing worse than having a job. I mean, imagine being in that job for 4 years and nobody ever tells you whether or not you're doing a good job. You're meeting the expectations. So it's a really important part. This is a job that can only be done by council. The only person that can evaluate the CAO is the council. So you really need to do that. Very important. And you should have a staff council code of conduct. So there should be clear parameters around your behaviors. What behaviors are okay, what behaviors are not okay. And obviously, you need to treat the staff with respect. Never, tear them down in public. It's a fatal thing. They can't respond in public, So criticism of staff needs to be done in camera. So there need to be some sort of guardrails around how you behave with the staff and how the staff behaves with council. So doing these kinds of things can really help begin to build a good relationship with your staff.
So just curious, I happen to have some inside knowledge into a municipality that's really struggling with the culture within the staff. It's not in the North Okanagan, so I'm caveat with that. And they reached out to me and asked for what can we do? Is there involvement at some point where the council can say, we can see the turnover is ridiculous, culturally there needs to be some changes? I know that the CAO is responsible for the staff, but what if the CAO and those that are within the group are not dealing with that obvious, it seems so obvious to the rest of the organization?
So the problem is at the staff level, not between the staff and the council. Well, one of the things that, you could do is, if the council's observing this, and staff turnover is a real indicator of that. If you've got a lot of churn in your organization, you know that people are not wanting to stay, right? So there's something wrong. So then it's probably time to do an evaluation of the CAO.
But it's a staffer that brought it to me, and they're just like, do I have any, like, can I do anything? I'm like, I don't have enough experience.
Oh, the staff, well, okay, let me come back to that.
Yeah, like,
But
it's
because
obvious,
this is,
like, if you were in the community, it's obvious, like, people should know this is a problem, and they're just asking me my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't have enough experience in that area.
because, let me come back to that in a minute, because what should probably happen is they should do something like a 360 for the CAO, so where you have an HR person come in and conduct, do interviews with the direct reports and get some feedback about the CAO, and then that would go to council, right? And council could take appropriate measures, right? If it's coming from the staff, woo! Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what I said, I'm like, I don't think you should.
Yeah, career limiting if you're to do it.
Especially in a small town.
Yeah. That's why you've got churn in the staff, right? That's why people are doing. But the council should be paying attention to that, I think.
Another thing.
Yeah, one thing. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah. But it is really, really important to build this trusting relationship with the staff, particularly with the CAO, so that you can really have a partnership and get the stuff done that you want to do. If there's conflict and poor communication between the CAO and the council, you're really gonna struggle. So, and it takes energy and work. We really need to look at this. So how to get stuff done? So you get elected to council. I mean, I hear this all the time. You get elected to council and say, well, I made all these promises in the campaign, so how do I get stuff done, right? So there are a couple things, right? Everything that council makes a decision on has to get onto a council agenda, right? So it has to be dealt with at a legitimate, properly constituted council meeting. So communities have different ways of getting things on the agenda, but you need to get your item on the agenda. You probably need to work with your fellow councillors. No point in getting something on the agenda if you don't think you've got support for it, right? It needs to get on the agenda. And then, there's a whole process, right, of bringing in information, that kind of stuff. But then you need to make a decision. So you can bring all you want to the council table, but council doesn't make a decision, then it's going to have no effect, right? So all decisions of council are made either by resolution or by bylaw, and they're really both are just decisions of council. Resolution is a simple motion. Somebody raise a hand, I move this, I second this, you have a discussion, you make a decision, resolution, done, right? Bylaw is something that's required by legislation to go through a particular process. It usually involves some kind of public process. So for a land use bylaw, it requires a public hearing, usually, not necessarily now. But there's usually some kind of public process involved. That's the distinction between a bylaw and a resolution. And a bylaw usually has several steps. It usually has 4 readings and it's a set of processes. And then most decisions of council are made by a simple majority of council, and there are a few that require a 2/3 vote of council. But most are just a simple majority. And regional districts are much more complicated decision-making process. But for councils, pretty straightforward. So if you want to get stuff done, got to get it on a council agenda, got to get the majority to agree with you, and got to give direction to your staff. And if you have a community where you have a strategic planning process, then you want your big items to go to the strategic planning process so that you can get it on the kind of a priority list, right? This is just about the resolution and the bylaw. And then what does in camera mean, right? So all of you who are elected officials know that they're called closed meetings now, but in camera means like in the dark, right? So outside of the view of the public. And in BC, the legislation says that all of your work of council must be done in public. That's the default. Everything has to be done within the view of the public. And then there are a few exceptions. But that's where you ought to start with. You ought to start with, my responsibility is to be able to make decisions in the view of the public, in the view of the constituents, because I'm accountable to them. And then there are just a couple of a few exceptions. You hear people talk about land, labor, and law as being the exceptions, and there's lots of the devil's in the details of this, and that's why you have a really good, that's why you have corporate officers, right, is to manage this process for you. But items that are personnel items are generally to be handled in closed meetings, and that's to protect the privacy of your staff. Typically, like if you're letting go a staff member, your CAO, that's all done. Confidentiality, and typically the information is not released to the public. If there's legal advice, if there's litigation going on, typically that is held. Those discussions are held in camera and closed meetings, and that's to protect the interests of the corporation. So you're a corporation as a municipality, so to protect your interests and to avoid risk. So you don't want your opposition in litigation knowing what your legal advice is, right? So you're allowed to discuss those things in closed meetings. And then there are some land decisions that you can discuss in closed meetings too. So the acquisition, disposition, and expropriation of land. So if you're you say the municipality wants to buy a piece of land and you want to put a bid in on that piece of land, you don't want the general public knowing that you're going to bid $100,000 on that piece of land, right? It's not going to be in the interest of the corporation. So you're allowed to discuss those things in camera. This is a very contentious part of local government these days, and there's been litigation. People have been sanctioned over releasing in-camera information. You know, if you are part of in-camera discussions, you cannot release that information. You cannot. It's a breach of the law, and it's a serious breach of the law. So there are things, you know, I happen to be married to a psychiatrist. There are things about his, which was very handy, by the way, while I was there. It didn't help, but it was helpful at the time. You know, he would never disclose information about his patients to me. There are all kinds of things that he knows that I don't know. And he's never telling me those things. That's what you would expect of him. And there are things about my time on council that my husband does not know, and he still doesn't know. That's because you need to protect the corporation or organization, right? And so you make a commitment to uphold the law, you don't disclose in-camera information. You do not pass the brown envelope to somebody. What constitutes a meeting? You know, so this is the opinion of the ombudsperson. This is also kind of, I bring this up because these are the little contentious things that will come back to bite you if you don't know about them. You can't gather your council together at somebody's house and talk about stuff just because you want to. You can't do that. So the ombudsperson recently said, a gathering is more likely a meeting if the attendees are discussing matters that would normally form the basis of the council's business and dealing with the matters in a way that moves them towards the possible application of council's authority. So if you are discussing things, hoping to advance the decision-making, you're holding a meeting and it needs to be duly constituted and it probably needs to be in public. So just bear that in mind. And I think that, you know, this has become more important over time. It's about fairness, it's about being accountability, it's about serving your constituents.
So how many people are we talking? What are those two councillors that are outside?
Well, you know, I have some other legal opinions about this, and they make reference to, they have a nice way of saying it, like a substantial portion of the council, right? Certainly if you have the majority, I think you could be in trouble.
So under 4, you're okay.
Well, I don't think so. I think really what the ombudsperson is saying here is that you ought to be doing the work of the municipality in the view of the public. And that anyone, any discussion is not appropriate. That's what I read this to be saying. A gathering is more likely to be a meeting if you're advancing the work towards a decision.
Could that mean in review material going to a council meeting that will be up for discussion and vote? If you have a meeting to discuss the topics that are going to arise in the council meeting.
You mean with the council?
Yeah.
You know, you probably think there are some communities that do that hold or have done this in the past. I suspect this is less likely to be happening now, but I'm thinking of one community that I work for in particular, where they used to hold a pre-meeting before the council meeting, and it would be held in closed. That's not on.
If it's open, like if it's open to the public.
Oh, then it's a duly constituted meeting.
You can have discussion prior to a council meeting on the topics. If you don't have an understanding of a new traffic interchange or whatever the case may be, you can have a meeting, discuss it, get the information from the experts as a council.
Absolutely.
As long as it's available to the public, and then go for it.
Yeah, because it's a meeting, right? You give a notice, the public are aware the meeting's being held, the agenda's published, it's a meeting. And that's what the ombudsperson is talking about here. It's a meeting, and therefore it needs to be duly constituted as a meeting. And yeah, you don't have to make decisions. It could be a committee meeting, it could be a workshop, it could be something informal, right?
Seems that some people misconstrue it, saying that we can't talk about it before the council meeting. Well, you can if it's open to the public. You can have a discussion.
Yeah.
You can't go to the pub before the meeting and have a conversation at the meeting.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So our corporate officer reminds us of that awful.
Awesome! Is that you? Yeah.
She's like, preach it, sister.
Again, you know, if you go back to democratic principles, this is about fairness. It's about transparency. It's about the public being able to see your work and your decision making. If you're making the decisions in the back room, it's not fair. There are people left out, and the public doesn't get to see your work. And that's, you know, it's not how we are supposed to be doing our jobs. Yeah.
I was just wondering how committees fit into that.
How what?
Committee, like you had a committee.
Committee, you know, I mean, you can have a committee meeting. I think the trick is, now that that's right, because I remember your corporate officer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you know, you have to give notice. You have to set out when the meeting is going to be, the public needs to be aware. It can be a committee meeting. It can be just an information meeting. No decisions made, no debate, no motions. It's just an information meeting. It just needs to be viewable by the public.
And call a meeting, big minutes, and all that.
Yeah, and do all that. That's right, and make them available. Yeah. So that's the key. It doesn't have to be the sort of real formal council meeting because people sometimes feel really constrained by that. It can be
And they're actually
easy
quite valuable, those committee roles, so it's a big topic, we like to have those all that information, you know? And when you get into a council meeting, things need to go a little quicker, and you don't have the lengthy discussions, and you might not have the experts there to give their opinions on things, that's why committee of the whole, you know.
Yeah, and people are just, if you have, committee meetings or committee of the whole meetings, people just tend to relax because you just know, okay, well, we're not here to make a decision. We're here to really kind of wrestle with this, hear some information, talk about it, and then we'll come back another day and we'll have some motions and we'll sort of have a more formal process. But for tonight, we're just going to try to think about this. It takes the pressure off, I think. Yeah.
I like this question of committee meetings. Let's throw an example out here. You have a developer that is interested in doing something in your community, a piece of property.
Yeah.
We're not going to hold a public meeting for that because he doesn't know what he wants to do yet, but he wants to get council's opinion. This is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you want to see?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're told we can't do that.
Well, you first of all, you have a community planning of a zoning bylaw, so he knows what he can do.
Yes.
You know, within the current rules, but he probably wants to do something different. I'll tell you what we did, and it seemed to work for us. We provided, the current council in my community doesn't do this, but I thought it was a great idea because you know, the development community was complaining that, you know, they had to go through all this process only to be rejected, right? And it was expensive and it took time. So we provided an opportunity for a developer to come to the table and present to council. And we call it the 15 minutes of fame. They could come, they had 15 minutes of council's time to float an idea. And council would give some kind of feedback. Sometimes wouldn't give any feedback, which was chilling, right? You know, they might say, well, you know, we really need to go through the process to know if this is going to work. So, and sometimes you said, we think this looks like a really interesting proposal.
So that would be a committee meeting?
Yeah, it was a committee meeting. And
open to the public.
Sorry?
And open to the public.
Totally open to the public. So it was a great opportunity for the public to know what was going on in somebody's mind. You have to be careful not to say no. You can't do that. Right? You can't say no, but you can say, ooh, okay, you know, something like this. Let's see, this is not consistent with our official community plan. It requires a rezoning and it requires an agricultural land reserve exemption. This is going to be a long process. You give that kind of response. And
Don't advertise it to the public, but just have it.
Oh, no. This has to be a duly constituted public meeting. It has to be.
Would it be in camera?
No.
If you're not making
No.
a decision?
You just step up if I'm saying something wrong. No. These kinds of discussions must be held in public. They must be held in public. Now, you know, the mayor probably meets with developers from time to time, I suspect. I certainly did. The development community wants to meet with the mayor. That's fine. I never committed to anything. Heard them out. Yeah, you can't. You're only one vote. You're only one vote, right?
I get it all.
So, but you know, there is something about meeting with the mayor, right? Important people want to meet with important people. So, you know, I was always prepared to meet with people. I always met with them in my office, by the way, and most of the time I had like the CAO with me or somebody else in the room. So that was my comfort level. But no, if you're talking about a development proposal, it needs to be in the public, and you need to be prepared. You don't want to commit to it, but you can give people a sense of where they're headed. Yeah, that's a hot topic, isn't it? That's interesting.
The reality is on that, there's an issue up when two councils want to talk about it. Sometimes you can't do that in a council meeting because you're just trying to get into your personal feel on a certain issue.
Yes.
And I don't care if it's new or not, it happens all the time. That you might go to one of the other councils and say, you know, what do you really think about it? I mean, that's the exact problem.
That's the whole problem.
I don't care if it happens or not.
It's frustrated with that.
Well, I'm saying it's wrong. You're just trying to get a feeling of it because lots of it, you don't have all the information yet. And I know when we were dealing with the golf course, we said, you know, we need to get a committee of the whole, so we need all these people come in that are experts.
Yeah.
Come in to everybody and give us all the information. Sometimes you get to little bits of this and that, it's not enough.
Yeah, well, I think you've already hit on it here. You know, there's a difference between advancing a decision and talking about the process. If you're talking about the process and saying, hey, we need a committee meeting here. We need a chance to talk about this. We need some expert advice. I think talking about that is fine.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to go back to your council and you're going to say, hey, we need a committee meeting to talk about this. If you're talking about tapping on several council members and saying, hey, I think you should vote this way. We should.
I'm talking about.
And that's a different matter. So that's advancing the decision. So if you're talking about the process, I think that's fine. I think that's just fine. It's about, again, the other legal opinion, which I don't have here, talks about advancing the decision.
Right.
That advancing the decision should happen in the public.
No, it's mostly, it's exactly what you said. There's things come up and say, we just don't have enough information.
Yeah, well, I think that's.
More information, so let's get everybody together.
I think that's
what
fair.
I mean, because we feel that way. What I find sometimes that we get decisions have to be made at council, and I know a lot of us sometimes are comfortable saying, well, hold on, we don't know enough about this.
Yeah.
And so we either defer it.
Yeah.
Bring back more information, let's have this, bring these efforts, and we seem to be doing that a lot more in the last little while. Yeah. Because we have some big issues.
Yeah, and I think that's wise. I think you should never feel pressured to make decisions. If you really feel, oh man, we've just received this information and I need time to think about it. Can we defer this, right? Or no, we need more information. I think you should take your time because often these are big decisions, right? And now there are parts of the community that are going to say, yeah, but this is why government takes so long. You just want to think about it, you defer it. But, if they're important enough decisions, then you should take your time. Better that than trying to go back and undoing a decision. It can be really complicated, right? I'm not going to touch on this, but those of you who are elected official, or those of you who will want to be elected officials, conflict of interest. We have been legislation around this now, and you need to make sure that your personal interests are separate from your role as being an elected official. And if you're elected, there's generally really good training. I think every community in the province now deals with this. And if you find yourself in a jam, typically you have a corporate officer who might be able to help you sort out some of it. And if you're really in a jam, then you might have to get your own independent legal advice. But at the end of the day, the responsibility to declare a conflict of interest is on the individual. Council doesn't tell a member of council that they're in a conflict of interest. It's the individual's responsibility. And the risk is to the individual. The risk is being taken by, I think it's 10 members of the electorate taken to court. And in my time in office, in a neighboring community, there was an elected official who got themselves tangled up in a land use deal, and he was actually taken to court, and he was declared to be in conflict, and he was disqualified for office. He got chirped off the council. So very serious penalty. So really separating out your personal interests from your interests as elected officials, really, really important, and more of interest to the public, right? They will care.
I think our pretty talk about perceived conflict as well as legal conflict, especially in smaller communities.
Yeah.
Your friend or is doing something. Yeah. You should back up. Yeah. I mean, it's different in Vancouver where you're a million people, but when you're in a community of 5,000, you lived here your whole life, you have a lot of perceived conflicts.
Yeah, and you have to.
And they aren't legalized. Yeah. But you should back them.
Yeah, you have to work really hard to try to minimize those percentages. Yeah, it must be really hard in a small community. Sorry, somebody else wanted to say something.
If somebody's been disqualified from council, they've been removed, they've been found in a conflict, are they not allowed to then run again, or are they're just removed at that time?
No, I think they can run again. Do you?
I believe it's a period of time that they're disqualified from office from. There is a list during elections, so when candidate names come forward, you have to check candidate names against the list of those who have been disqualified, and it's for a time period. I think 8 years or 10 years.
Yeah, it's not forever though. I don't think.
No, it's not forever.
Yeah. But it's it's as serious a penalty as you can enact in our system, really. Bias, so this is from a land use court case. Elected officials are expected to have an open mind, not an empty mind. So interesting, when I was in Kamloops, they've had this just recently on their council, that one of their councillors came to a land use decision, or expressed a point of view before a public hearing, said, I don't know exactly what she said, but something like, I'm not voting for this, no matter what. And that is a closed mind, and she's had to recuse herself from the decision making. So you want to come to these decisions with an open mind. So, during the election campaign, you ought not to say, I will never vote for this development, because that's a closed mind. You need to be open. That's why you have a public process. That's why you have a public hearing, is so you can hear from the public, and you need to be open to persuasion, right? So that's bias. Just want to be careful about that. Time commitment. So you guys tell me, you guys that are elected officials, how much time do you spend on council business? Was it more than you thought it was going to be?
Yeah. Ask the mayor how much time he spends.
Yeah.
It's a part-time job and a full-time commitment. That's what I tell her.
Yeah. It's a much greater time commitment. I think some people run for office thinking, oh, it's a meeting on Monday night every 2 weeks, right? But of course, it's much more than that. All the time spent reading, all the time meeting people, talking to constituents. If you sit on the regional district, there's all that stuff. So it is a significant time commitment.
I have a question there then for city councilors. What if you have other plans, like you like the vacation? If you need time away for stuff like that, is there are you able to get away?
Yeah. I mean, we're allowed to miss 3 meetings a year without losing your stipend. But if you're planning a holiday to Hawaii, I would not do it during budget time, and I would not do it during a couple other times of the year that are really important. Yeah. Because that sets the stage for the whole year. Yep. And we only have 1 meeting in the summer. Yeah. So if you want to take a holiday in February and go to Hawaii, talk to the CAO, or the corporate officer, and it's fine. I mean, we have to make sure we have a quorum, and if 6 members of council want that particular Monday off, then we've got to cancel a meeting.
But I mean, Zoom issues brought new, so if you're away now, we have Zoom capability. You can Zoom in, but I would be quite honest, it's not the same as being in a council room, as being on Zoom.
Yeah. So do you meet every 2 weeks?
We just changed it this year to every 3 weeks. And why we did that is to reduce the amount of paperwork, the amount of minutes.
Yeah.
For a council meeting, it almost takes a corporate officer a week to do the minutes, to get the agenda ready, and everything else. Yeah. Something important comes up, we call a special council meeting. Yeah. So we've actually given Nicole an extra week to do the real work.
Yeah. So if that's the case, once every 3 weeks, so you can miss a council meeting, you could have 6 weeks away. I mean, so, and even
if you that's your legal.
So I appreciate the time commitment. I always see you guys cars parked down at City Hall all the time for a part-time job. And I think you have to do that to have a good feel for the community. You have to be involved, engaged, all those other things. But you still need to get away and have a life outside city.
COVID's kept us at home too.
Now we're all keen to be back with people.
But I think if you have a full-time job, and you want to be fair for your job or fair for council, it's hard to do.
It is hard to do.
Our council, every Monday of the month, first Monday, we have a committee of the whole. Start at 9 in the morning, and then we'll go the whole day. And 2 weeks, then you have one meeting in between. Sometimes it's 3 in the afternoon, also. So it is very difficult to be two phases at once.
Yeah. And you know, yeah, different councils have tried to manage that, tried to set meeting times in evenings so that people at work can get in. My community now is trying to set meetings at 4 o'clock, 4 to 6 o'clock, because I guess people feel they can accommodate that in a workday. But I worked with one community where the fellow worked in Spark, worked in the mine, and he's still on council, but he's really struggled. It's been hard, right? If you're working shift work, that's going to be really hard to work out. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, if we didn't have our community hall, we never did that. So we do a lot of discussion through the resolution maker, through the whole, but we go through a lot of in-depth and better than if you do it at night. Say you start at 7, at times we don't have time to do that.
Yeah, I think the challenge of that is that, you know, there's concern on some parts that, you know, you're excluding members of your community from being elected officials. So women, younger people, women with children is what I'm thinking of, right? So trying to, if you want a diverse council to reflect the diversity of the community, you need to work at trying to organize it so that people can actually come and be part of that. So I think it's an ongoing struggle for lots of councils to figure out, well, what is actually going to work.
Are there any small communities that you know of that do that well, so that they can attract candidates that are still employed and have to I know that job was hard for him, I imagine.
Yeah, I don't actually, but I know that it is on people's minds and they're trying to figure it out. And so, you know, some communities that hold their meetings in the daytime now are really struggling with that. I mean, City of Vancouver, City of Victoria both hold their meetings a full day, right? That's really hard for working.
So that's a full-time job.
Yeah, in that case, you're right. Both of those communities pay sufficient that it could be a full-time job. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Yeah.
But then you keep across now, we're tied in with the regional district, so yeah, regional district is regional growth, and even the total to do about the fire department is Parks and Rec. There is real estate. All of that is earned. Everything is earned. Yeah. So it does take a lot of time on that, or all on that, but everybody takes turns on this stuff. So there's more daytime stuff than you realize.
Yeah, you know, when I was first elected, our community mayor was a school principal, and in our case, he was going to be the rep to the regional district, and he actually. He couldn't do it. Another member of council did it. So I mean, there are things like that you can do, but it is a real challenge. Okay, time. Just a few things about collaborating. If you're now a part of this shared and collective decision making, what are the things you need to do to kind of collaborate? Like, actually, how do you do that, right? Listening again, really respecting diversity, value all points of view, really do that. Agree on expectations, so when you're doing your strategic planning, really working on trying to agree at that point, right, early on, so you set the expectations for the terms, what you're going to achieve. And setting the priorities and really sticking to them. I think doing all of those things proactively will really help you in the long run actually be able to collaborate as a group. And I'd just like to talk about this. This comes from the world of sort of group dynamics, sociology. This is what you can expect when you first get elected, especially if there's been a big change on your council. You know, you form a group, you're in the forming stage, you come together, you're going to start to work, you're all pretty excited, you've just been through this campaign, you won, awesome, we're now this part of this council. And then pretty quickly, you're going to feel people jockeying for position. There's going to be conflict and tension, and that person's got a big ego, and no, I don't like how he said that, or she's really irritating me. So there's this period of storming, perfectly normal in a group, when a group comes together. And then if you work at it, you'll begin to develop some norms about how you're going to get along. You know, you're going to learn to be patient, you're going to listen to that person go on and on and on, and you're going to be okay about it.
That's
You're
the
just,
regional district report.
you're going to be able to, you know, you're norming. You've gotten out of the storming phase. The irritation level isn't so high. You're norming, and if you're lucky enough then, and you find the norms, the way to get along, then you're going to perform. And that's when you can be a high-performing organization. That's when you really get stuff done. But you know what? Lots of councils get stuck storming, and they never get out of it. And they spend 4 miserable years in conflict and wrestling with each other and, you know, jockeying for position and who's got the most media attention and who's doing this and who's doing that. And it is really miserable. You want to find a way to get beyond that so that you can really perform on behalf of your communities. And so I think you can expect this. This is typical human behavior, right? And then you'll perform, and then before you know it, you're going to adjourn, and there'll be another election. So expect this, and when you get into the storming phase, you've got to really work at finding ways to get along. And the mayor often plays a big role in this. Just helping people to come along and get along, and, you know, set the tone at the meeting, and be positive, be constructive, reminding people why they're there. They're there to do good for their community, and, you know, we can do this, right? So yeah, this is, you can really expect that this will happen in almost every case. Yeah, know your moral compass and your values. Know your official community plan. You ought to know what's in it. I looked at these and I thought both of them were quite old.
We're working on it.
2014 in Armstrong's not so bad, but I think Spelling Chains is vintage. But you know, these are super powerful documents. They forecast the future, and they really are important. And
The COVID's put a damper on all of this.
oh yeah, well
Can't get community involved.
yeah, my community is going through an OCP review right now, so I feel your pain on that, absolutely. But this is, stop it. This is from the City of Squamish strategic plan, and they are the first community that I saw that did this. So you can see the official community plan at the top. That should drive your council strategic plan, which will drive your organizational action plan, your work plan, which will drive the budgets and the 5-year financial plans, and then the information will come out in the annual report. So the council strategic plan should not be independent of the official community plan. The official community plan is the expression of the public, the future, the vision for the community, right? And, you know, if you have a current OCP, it's much harder to do if you don't, but if you have a current official community plan, the direction that is expressed in your priorities in the council strategic plan should flow out of that. And if you think I'm nuts, and this is, oh, she's just making this up, I just read the draft City of Nanaimo city plan, and they've expressed exactly the same thing. So Nanaimo city plan, which is their OCP, they're just finalizing it now, and you can see that it's going to it's going to drive the council's strategic plan. So this is the way we're conceptualizing this now. That you go through this huge public process when you create an official community plan. You engage the community, they express their aspirations for the community, you set a vision, you set priorities, and that's where you should start with your strategic plan. And then just a bit of advice from the trenches. Understand your role. Uphold the foundational principles. Ensure at the beginning of your term you have really good orientation and training, and you take advantage of all the training that's out there from EBCM and the Local Government Leadership Academy. Be honest. Ask lots of questions. Support strategic planning and stick to the plan over the term. You don't sort of create a plan at the beginning of your term and put it on a shelf and it gathers dust. You actually use it. Be sensitive to the 4-year cycle of a council. You know, there are things that are better done early in the term rather than late in the term. You don't want to be starting your MCIP review in year 4. That's a bad idea. You work in a world of compromise. You know, you really have to learn to compromise because you've got 5 or 7 or 9 people around the table, and you need to bend and flex and find places where you can find common ground. Diversity is a strength, and respect the democratic process, majority rules, and there are going to be times when you're on the losing end and it really sucks. It's awful. And you might have really battled hard for it, and you were not with the majority, and you need to get over it. You need to be able to move on, so you get stuck, it'll be miserable. A lot of learning has to go on when you're elected. There's a lot of stuff to learn, and you need to be prepared for that. And it doesn't all happen at the beginning of the term. You can only take in so much information. So just be prepared. There's lots of learning, and here's my little, oh, we got failure again.
I agree, reboot.
Mike, wake up. Yeah, Mike's asleep.
I'm clicking buttons. Come on now.
Because that's almost the last slide. That, you know, really to think of, you know, you talk about continuous learning now. As a council member, you really have to be learning all the time, really be working at learning and taking advantage of things like the UBCM convention and the local government leadership academy forums. And there's going to be all kinds of online stuff. Both the ministry and UBCM are going to be doing more and more kind of town halls and information sessions electronically, so it'll make it much, much more affordable than it has been in the past. Way to go. Thanks, Mike.
You got it.
You're our guy.
I'm something, all right.
It's just, I just go to this last slide. It's just very finicky. One more, come on, there we go. Oh! And every year, like if you do develop a strategic plan for your council, you want to do a check-in every year, making sure that you're progressing in, achieving the things that you wanted to achieve over your term of office. And if you do an orientation at the beginning of your term, about 6 months later, especially if you've had a big turnover on your council, when I was involved with the local government leadership academy, 2.5 days, right? People go, they're completely swamped with information. I could just see as they walked out, they're just glazed over. Like, oh my God, what have I got myself into, right? Only so much of that will stick, and really you should come back about 6 months later and go through some of the stuff. Have regular lunch and learns. It's a learning job. Really, if you want to do it well, you got to, be on your game. And there's lots of good resources out there, and that's what this last slide is. There we go. So on the mechanics of the election, we have an expert here. I suspect, are you the election officer?
Yes, not yet.
So Elections BC has really good information on the mechanics. There are campaign finance rules, there are campaign rules, there are dates, all that kind of stuff that you have to pay attention to. Elections BC website. The ministry website is excellent and has all of the codes of conduct information that I referred to, the foundational principles of forging the path documents, model codes of conduct. They're all up on the ministry website as well as UBCM's website. The Charter and the Local Government Act are both up there. Ellie Nina, who's a veteran parliamentarian in BC, really a fantastic guy, a great writer, and he has a website that has incredible information around meetings and meetings behaviors and good meeting behavior on his website. It's all free. And the Ombudsperson has a best practices guide for local governments on open meetings if you have more interest in closed meetings. And I'm happy to send this to Patty, the slides, and you can send it if you would. Yeah. We're just about on time. Any questions, or everybody ready to go and have a beer and go to sleep?
Let's do it. Tell the pub to stay open. Does anyone have a, like, anyone at that? No? Tell the pub to stay open. I love it. It's either tell the pub to stay open.
I sometimes feel like I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer, giving you a heads up on some of this stuff, but I really, for those of you who are thinking of running for the first time or running again, I commend you on it. You're doing your duty to your country, your queen, you're playing this incredibly important role in your communities, and even if you get beaten up on social media from time to time, I'm here to tell you that you're doing the right thing and a good job, and I encourage you on it and congratulate you for being courageous enough to do the work. Thank you for being a fun group.
Thank you. Very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And unfortunately, most of them are already indoctrinated. I think it was very interesting.